Let me back up a sec, because if you'd told me even a year ago that I'd spend my retirement fending off a suburban tyrant with a clipboard, a spreadsheet, and a mean streak, I'd have laughed in your face and gone back to stacking boxes in my U-Haul. But that's exactly what happened, and I'm telling you, it was the wildest ride I've ever taken, combat zones included. So, buckle up, because this isn't one of those we moved to the lake and lived happily ever after stories. Not even close. The whole thing kicked off before the dust even settled on our driveway. We'd barely unloaded the coffee maker when Laura Evans showed up at the gate. Perfect hair, golf club khakis, that clipboard hugged to her chest like it contained state secrets, and a smile so fake you could smell the glue from 3 yards away. She clocked my wife's limp instantly. I mean, her eyes just locked in, laser beam style, and she muttered, "Another one looking for special accommodation." Just loud enough that you couldn't miss it, but soft enough to dodge a lawsuit. That's the kind of person Laura was. All plausible deniability, no soul. She ran the Pine Lake HOA like her own private fiefdom, built on fear, paperwork, and a sixth sense for sniffing out anybody she thought might be vulnerable or outnumbered. You know what I mean? Predators don't go for the strongest. They go for the ones limping a little, the ones they think won't fight back. She'd made a hobby out of breaking people, destroyed 5 families in 3 years, and nobody dared to challenge her. Until she ran headfirst into Hannah. Now, Hannah, my wife, she's not the type to posture or play victim. She's got this calm, steady thing about her, a military bearing that never quite faded even after her medical retirement. 16 years of gathering intel in places where the wrong question could get you killed. She'd learned to let people underestimate her, learned to look harmless while she was mentally taking notes on every way someone was breaking the law. So when Laura hit us with her opening move, $700 in move-in compliance fees, architectural deposits, and an inspection checklist that looked like the IRS wrote it for fun, Hannah just looked her dead in the eye and said, "Ma'am, can you clarify which specific HOA bylaws authorize these fees? Because according to Colorado statutes," and let me tell you, Laura flinched. Just for a second, like someone yanked the rug under her shoes. Then she plastered on that brittle grin, doubled down on the rules, and tried to make Hannah carry boxes in 90-degree heat, all while muttering about special treatment and civilians following civilian rules. It was textbook bullying, but my wife had seen far worse. Thing is, we weren't alone. Across the street, Elizabeth Collins, silver hair, courtroom eyes, retired court reporter, watched every second. What I didn't know then was that Mrs. Collins was already building a case. She'd spent 40 years transcribing federal trials, so she knew exactly what discrimination looked like, and she saw Laura's act for what it was, systematic cruelty, wrapped in HOA bureaucracy. By the time Laura was done with us that first day, she'd squeezed $800 from our pockets and made sure every neighbor saw who was in charge. The crowd went along, either out of fear or apathy, same thing, really, when it comes to small-town tyrants. But that night, Mrs. Collins knocked on our door with a folder of notes, her old business card, and a look that said she'd seen enough. "I've watched this woman destroy families. You document everything, you hear me? I'll help you. She's not as untouchable as she thinks." The next day, Laura switched tactics. Now it was investment opportunities, which meant, of course, she'd found 15 things wrong with our house. Mailbox a half-inch too tall, paint not seasonal enough, weeds, landscaping, you name it. She'd done her homework on our finances, even mentioned my teaching salary and Hannah's VA benefits. The bill was $2,400, due in 48 hours. Precision-guided economic warfare, meant to break us before we could even think about fighting back. But Laura hadn't counted on Mrs. Collins, who'd spent her night digging into public records and came over waving HOA budget spreadsheets. "Fascinating discrepancies, Laura. You want to explain these administrative fees and emergency expenditures?" Laura went white. Turns out, she wasn't just running shakedowns. She was embezzling community funds to cover her own financial mess. Maxed out cards, foreclosure looming on her mansion, the whole 9 yards. Suddenly, her threats didn't sound so scary, just desperate. But Laura still had cards to play. That Wednesday, I got called into the principal's office at school. "Thomas, we need to talk. There's been a complaint." Laura had filed a dossier accusing me of unstable home conditions, claiming Hannah's disability and our supposed paramilitary lifestyle made me a threat to students. Fake photos, doctored audio, even statements from neighbors she'd pressured or manipulated. She'd weaponized my own job against me, betting that the school would cut ties with the unstable veteran family before anyone looked deeper. For a minute, I thought she'd won. I called Hannah, shaken. Her response? She's targeting your job because that's where you're vulnerable, but she just made a mistake. Now it's a documented campaign, not just neighbor drama. Not long after, our neighbor Jason, a young computer science teacher, showed me the digital forensics. Metadata on Laura's evidence proved it had been edited with software only pros use. This wasn't hobby level. This was psychological ops territory. That's when it all shifted. Hannah made some phone calls, government types, by the sound of it. Phrases like domestic threat assessment, pattern recognition, federal protocols. Within a day, the school district's IT team confirmed the files were fakes. I got an apology and a promotion for how I'd handled the stress. Laura? She doubled down, filing more complaints with state and federal agencies. But it was like fighting a hydra. Cut one head off, 3 more popped up. Meanwhile, Mrs. Collins traced Laura's history. Turns out, Laura had run the same racket in other communities, always targeting military families or people she thought couldn't fight back. And suddenly it wasn't just about us. It was about something way bigger, a pattern that looked almost like a coordinated campaign. Then Laura took the war online. Overnight, we woke to viral videos, doctored clips showing Hannah threatening neighbors, fake testimonials, hashtags painting us as violent veterans. Our home address and phone numbers posted online, calls for community safety patrols at our house, anonymous messages and threats. For the first time since her deployments, I saw Hannah rattled. She's not just harassing us. She's coming after my security clearance, my career. That's when Mrs. Collins's nephew, a cybersecurity pro, jumped in, tracing Laura's sock puppet accounts and fake social campaigns. It was all organized, dozens of fake identities, coordinated messaging, premeditated. Hannah made one last call, this time using words like federal jurisdiction and domestic terrorism implications. The next day, an unmarked car rolled up to Laura's mansion. Federal investigators, suits and badges, the real deal. Laura panicked, filed charges against Hannah, claiming military intimidation and threats. But the police sent Officer Stone, an Afghanistan vet who recognized Hannah's name and code sign from his own mission logs. One look at the evidence, one phone call to confirm Hannah's background, and suddenly the case flipped. Ma'am, your intel saved my platoon in 2015, Stone told Hannah, right in front of Laura and the neighbors. The dynamic changed instantly. That's when Mrs. Collins brought out her ace. 18 months of documentation, testimony from other families, forensic records, every detail cataloged. Stone's verification call to federal authorities triggered a full-scale response. Laura was told to stay available for questioning, and as Stone put it, there's something about your neighbor you clearly don't understand. The crowd, which had been Laura's personal jury, was suddenly seeing the story in a whole new light. Saturday morning, the showdown. Laura strutted out like she still had cards to play, demanding arrests, insisting on her rights as a civilian, accusing us of conspiracies. Stone shut her down with a single sentence. Lieutenant Colonel Harris, ma'am, I apologize for what you've endured. Your record shows classified commendations for valor. I want this community to understand they've been watching the harassment of a war hero. The silence that followed? Deafening. Neighbors looked at their shoes. Some actually apologized on the spot. Laura's few allies started bailing, and the people who'd backed her tyranny suddenly couldn't distance themselves fast enough. The evidence Mrs. Collins turned over was the final nail. Laura was arrested, not just for HOA shenanigans, but federal charges. Cyberstalking a government contractor, embezzlement, coordinated harassment of military families. The FBI investigation revealed she'd been part of a broader network, targeting veterans and their families all over the state. Restitution seized her assets, lawsuits buried her financially, and her reputation gone overnight. Hannah got promoted. Her case became the blueprint for protecting other military families from systematic harassment. Mrs. Collins was honored by the Bar Association. Her documentation techniques went national, and Pine Lake turned its shame into action. New board, New rules, a military family day every year. Laura's story ended the way these stories rarely do, stripped of everything, shunned, working odd jobs for relatives who barely tolerated her. But in the middle of all this victory, Hannah found a letter in Laura's files, addressed to a name connected to a Marine who died under suspicious circumstances. Tom, she whispered. Laura wasn't working alone. Whoever helped her, they're still out there. So, I'll ask you, have you ever had to stand up to someone who thought they could destroy you, just because they could? What gave you the guts to fight back? Drop your story in the comments, because sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to back down to change a whole community. And sometimes, as we learned, the end of one battle is just the first shot in a much bigger war. I read every comment. If you think justice means more than just following rules, share your take. Right or wrong, I want to hear what you think. And hey, if you've ever tangled with a neighborhood tyrant, let's hear about it. The world could use more stories of everyday people fighting back, don't you think?